Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate being invited to. So I run a number of biotech and medtech companies. I have a antibody approved, a drug approved, and a PMA device approved. So after going through all three and getting beat up quite a bit, I wrote a book. 2 chapters in the book say I don't want to fight anymore. So what I've decided to do, I have a lot to say. I decided to say it. So I started a thing called the the Institute for Patient-Centered Innovation. And I've been writing and speaking a lot, basically about how I believe the system is broken and how we can fix it. And it was very gratifying over the last few months to see that at least a few people read some of the stuff that I was writing, and hopefully it'll be enacted. All right, so why do I feel the way I do? Well, if you go back to the law, okay, you know, I was listening to the epigenetics discussion this morning, and it hit me. That's what the FDA has. It has an epigenetics problem. The genome is fine, okay? The policies are great. Safety and effectiveness is a great policy, okay? It's the regulation of safety and effectiveness. It's whether or not it's implemented correctly. So I teased the prior presenters. I'm going to make an epigenetics joke, but it's so true. The guidance documents basically control what parts of the law are going to be enacted, and we have some big problems there. So let's go back to the law. Let's go back to the genome of the FDA. And this is what it says in the law. To promote, the administration shall, this is the mission of the FDA, to promote the public health by promptly and efficiently reviewing clinical research and taking appropriate action on the marketing of regulated products in a timely manner. So within the first 3 lines of the law, you have 3 measures of efficiency, right? Promptly, efficiently, and in case you weren't paying attention, timely manner. It also says promote. And how do we do that? Foods are safe, wholesome, sanitarily, and properly labeled. That's great. Nothing about foods doing anything but being safe, wholesome, sanitary, and properly labeled. Seems to me now we're looking for foods to do so many things health-wise, but that's not what's in the law, okay? Safe, wholesome, and sanitary, properly labeled. Human veterinary drugs are safe and effective. That's good. There is a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness for devices. In the device world, it's not absolute safety and effectiveness. It's a reasonable assurance. That's, I hate to say lower or higher standard, that's a lower bar. Why? Because devices, you know, you can more implicit feeling of what they do. Cosmetics are safe and properly labeled. So that's what the law says. And as I said, safety and effectiveness for drugs and biologics, of course, is a great thing, and that's in the law as well. But if you go on the FDA website, this is what they say the mission is. The FDA is responsible for protecting the public health. Promoting and protecting are not the same thing, and that's where we've fallen off the rails. And I'll give an answer to why this happened right now. It's fear. I have great sympathy for the people that work at the FDA, though I've had 2 companies ruined by the process. And the reason I have sympathy is when they do things wrong, they get yelled at, and when they do things right, they get yelled at. And when you do things right, look at the case of Avandia, great drug. They got beat up for it. Why? And look what's happened now to every drug since then. We need these incredibly humongous outcome studies to prove we don't see toxicities, which I think is absurd. Anyway, so I have great sympathy. Again, promote promptly, efficiently, and timely manner is what the law says. The genomics is good. It's the epigenomics that's fouled up. Okay. All right. So, you know, Aquinas said if the highest aim of a captain were to preserve a ship, he'd keep it in port forever. Right? And that's what we don't want. We want innovation. You know, that's whenever I speak, I'm all about more and more products, more and more innovation. So if you look at this, something that Dr. Kaplan said on the prior panel, I thought was excellent, and I agree with wholeheartedly. If you look at probability of success through each stage, let's just focus on phase 1 through approval, 9.6%. You see that what's happening over the last, I'd say, 15 years, you see that rare disease programs and programs that utilize biomarkers, that's a way of taking a cancer like lung cancer, and we can turn it into a rare disease by looking at the ALK mutation. Okay, so these kinds of things. These had a much higher success rate and quicker than drugs for chronic diseases. The drugs, the diseases that kill, and also mentioned in the prior panel by Dr. Kaplan, right? The diseases that kill and affect tens of millions of people. So this says it all. The probability of success of a rare, something that meets the criteria. There's many programs I'll get into in a little while for the more rare diseases. 25.3% probability versus 8.7% probability for drugs that treat chronic conditions. Well, look, the FDA makes the circuits, okay? They make the circuits, and the industry is electrons, right? And electrons do what? Electrons follow the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is for the rarer diseases. And with genomics, we can turn any disease into a rare disease, right? We could turn, anything by just having this mutation or that, and that's what happens. So we're seeing with the true rare diseases, where the disease that the orphan drug was meant to address, right? This is interesting too, go back to the law with the orphan drug. No one mentions this part of it. The Orphan Drug Act says it'll give you 2 more years of exclusivity if you have a drug to treat a disease that under 200,000 patient incidence. There's another sentence after that, and it basically says something like, if it's over 200,000, that's okay too, and if there's regulatory language that basically says, if there's no way on God's green earth you'd make a profit. Okay? So the whole point of the Orphan Drug Act was basically to say to the big companies at the time, please, oh please, oh please, would you out of the goodness of your heart develop some products for these very rare diseases? We understand you won't be profitable. The Orphan Drug Act did not envision what we're seeing today at all, with this moving to these ultra-rare conditions and making tremendously successful companies based on that. That was not the intent of the law. That's another problem, with law. You can't legislate morality, right? You can't legislate everything. But if you go back to the intent of the law, you see what happens. So this is why we're seeing what we're seeing on this slide, right? Where there's this migration to rare diseases and trying to turn even common diseases into rare diseases, so you qualify for these programs, and then what happens to the big diseases? They get neglected, and I'll get into that in a moment. All right, so the FDA has passed over the years a number. I came into the industry in '89, all right? So they've passed over the years a number of programs designed to accelerate drug approval. Now, if you go to the regs, right, so 180 days is when you file an NDA, 180 days. I'm going to call on someone from the audience. What's 180 days? A school year, okay. When I say 180 days, if I said 180 days from today, in your mind, what would that be? Just wing it. We're in March. September. Very good. 180 days, we mean 6 months. Okay. It's not what FDA means. 180 day means 180 review days. So how on God's green earth can we have these PDUFA, if you see the PDUFA report cards from FDA, we are hitting 95% of the time. 95%. Some of these drugs take 3 years to be approved. It's calendar time. Review days is only 180 days. Right? So FDA starts and stops the clock all the time. Even with starting and stopping the clock, okay, even with controlling the timer, okay, guess what percent of the time drugs are reviewed within 180 days? The median is 183. And the FDA goes out and touts that. They tout, this is great performance. We have a median of 183. That means half the time you're over. That's what median means. Right? So they don't report the average. They don't report the calendar days. They report the review days. All right? So over the years, there have been many attempts to try to get the FDA to do things quicker. And so the first one came just before I started the industry, fast track. That didn't work so well. So then we did accelerated approval. That didn't work so well. Then we did priority review. That didn't work so well. Now we had this breakthrough therapy in 2012. I got a lot to say about that, but I'll calm down. But just read these. Just read the first line of all of these. They're basically the exact same thing. All right, now the regulatory purists in here, you can beat me up afterward. Just run with this for a moment. They're all for significant unmet medical need diseases. Okay? Ain't nothing there for diabetes. Ain't nothing there for heart failure. Ain't nothing there for Alzheimer's. Okay? Now, and so what this tells me, what this slide tells me, is that the system is broken. If we have to keep trying to come up with more and more programs, when we put one in and it doesn't work, the system's broken. But what's broken? The law is not broken. Safety and effectiveness is a good law. I love it. What's broken is the implementation of it. That's what's broken. I'll get into it in a little while. So if you look in 2014, 15 of the 35 new drugs approved received orphan designation, the highest since the Orphan Drug Act was passed in 1983. In 2015, so 15 out of 35 is 40%. In 2015, it was 48%. And in 2016, it was back to 40%. Okay, way too much. Way too much as a percentage. And you see where those are going. Okay, so let's talk about 2016. All right. So in 2016, 22 molecular entities were approved, and I just couldn't believe the coverage of this. This was being touted as like a great thing, you know. And then a number of people were saying, well, the reason there were only 22 was because a bunch of them were approved the prior year before them. Okay, so a few of the 35 from before cut into the 22. So you know, so the numbers just really aren't there for me. So let's take a look. 73% of the ones that were approved qualified for one of those four programs I just showed you. 73% got at least one of those designations. 41% were orphan drugs. And this was stated by the FDA. Most of the drugs approved have the potential to add significant clinical value to the care of thousands of patients with serious and life-threatening diseases. Thousands. But there's millions, millions with other diseases that are silently killing, unfortunately, a number of us more quickly than others in the audience. So let's take a look at last year's approval. How many were for cardiovascular disease, the number one killer? None. How about for diabetes? It was one. I'm going to get into that in a little while. How about for obesity? Another huge epidemic. The answer, none. And what about Alzheimer's disease? This is the one that frightens all of us, and it'll be the biggest epidemic ever, right? None. So I was giving this presentation recently at a meeting of small biotech companies, and someone in the audience said, yes, but you can't blame the FDA. They can only review what's submitted. So maybe they're not submitting this. Exactly. So why aren't they submitting? So I looked at the program of this conference I was at, and there were 95 cancer companies. You know how many diabetes companies there were? 3. So why do we have 95 cancer companies? And don't tell me because there's 200 different cancers. That's true, but that's nonsensical. And only 3 diabetes companies. And the reason is, let's take a look at that one diabetes drug that was approved. The name is escaping me. But I looked at the package insert. 12 studies, 11,000 patients. One of the studies was a 4,000 patient 6-year trial or a 6,000 patient 4-year trial. I forgot. Doesn't matter. It's crazy. Okay? So to get a diabetes drug, it was a GLP-1 inhibitor. Okay. So let's look at one of the cancer drugs, and we'll pick the one like from a big company. Right? So Tecentriq. One study, 310 patients. So if you were an investor, what would you rather invest in? A company develop cancers cancer drugs, where you can get a drug approval with 310 patients, phase 2 study, not randomized, or a diabetes company where you have to get, 11 studies, 6,000 patients. I mean, where are you going to put your money? Of course you're going to put it. You're going to invest in an Alzheimer's disease company? Let's think of that. You need 2 primary endpoints there. You have to have improvement in cognitive functioning, as well as 2 co-primaries, as well as an improvement in caretaker's assessment. Who's the caretaker with someone with Alzheimer's? Another 80-year-old. Okay? So that endpoint's totally fouled up. What happens to patients with Alzheimer's? They break hips, their children die, bad stuff happens. How do you control for that on a clinical trial? How do you balance that, right? Because that's what you have to do. What if you have an imbalance of those kind of factors in a trial that just misses, okay? So who's going to do that? You're going to invest in an Alzheimer's disease company? No, you're going to invest in a cancer company, right? And by the way, I'd advise you to, too, which really stinks. And I'd also advise you to get breakthrough therapy designation, even though I hate it. Why? Because those are the rules they're giving us to play with, right? Okay. This is just to show you how much these designations upset me. It's very, very rare to have a drug receive only one of the 4 designations. You often see they qualify for many. So it just goes back to my point earlier that the programs just aren't working. Okay? So, all right. So I've been making a big deal about the FDA is there to promote health, and yet its stated mission is to protect health. Andy von Eschenbach, former FDA commissioner, has made the same point. And I went to a recent advisory committee meeting because I was working with a graduate student on a project, and she was going to read through many transcripts of advisory committee meetings. And I said, you should really go down and look at one. And she said, okay, there's one next week. And I looked at it, and it was I think it was Amgen drug for C. difficile recurrence. And I looked at the documents for this, and it was a joke. I was like, this is a slam dunk. This thing should be approved. No, we're not going to that one. I want to go one with a little more contentious. She says, no, I want to go to that. So we went. And it was anything but a slam dunk. I'll get into it in a little while. But this struck me. In the intermissions like we have here, where you're going to fill time, this was one of the slides. FDA advisory committees, protecting the public health. Okay, if you were an advisory committee member and you saw that, how are you going to judge the drugs before you? Okay, so let's see what they do. Well, first of all, if you go back to the law, go back to the genome of the FDA, all right, with respect to advisory committees, there's 2 things in the law I like to look at the most. First is it says the FDA shall obtain recommendation regarding approval from advisory committee meetings. The language is extremely clear. Okay. There's another part of the law which says that advisory committees will be conducted in such a manner to foster truthful communication, something like this, about that they want an honest scientific debate. Okay, why are companies not allowed to speak in the afternoon at advisory committees when things are going back and forth? Okay, so again, these are the things that the law is beautiful, but it's the implementation. So let's take a look at this one. So this same student went back and looked at the advisory committees of the last decade, okay, so the last 6 years. And this is what she found. The cardiovascular and renal division does it right. 100% of the time, at their panel meetings, they ask the following question. Do you recommend drug X for condition Y? It's a beautiful, short, succinct statement, just the way the regs want it. The regs, the guidance documents even say it shouldn't be convoluted, shouldn't have triple negatives and all this kind of stuff. Okay. But basically only, I think it's 25% of the time, do you have a direct question about approvability being asked. Where is the question never asked? Antimicrobials never asked the question. We basically, we have an antibiotics crisis in the country, folks. Okay? We have resistant bugs. Big issue here. Cancer. What's cancer? Cancer did it in just a couple. So I think 1 out of 25. All right. Now, if you extend the definition to, which I did, which is, okay, let's see if the word approval is somewhere in the question. Okay. Then the number jumps to 66%. But this is where but you still have antimicrobial never asking the approval question. All right. So this is wrong. When I was at that panel meeting that I just talked about, this was amazing. The panel chair, brilliant man, Harvard, okay? He made the point that because the way that the FDA asked the question, the FDA uses this question called substantial evidence. I'm going to go to another person in the audience, another friend of mine. What do you think substantial evidence means? Do you think it means, I'm going to give you two choices. Does it mean the nature of the studies that generated the data, or the magnitude of the effect seen in the data? Which do you think is substantial evidence? You're brilliant. You must be an analyst. Oh, you are an analyst. Okay, so exactly right. Substantial evidence, when it comes to FDA, it's a term of art, and it has to go with the kinds of studies that were done, right? It does not go to, so the FDA puts in the questions, do you believe there's substantial evidence of safety and effectiveness, da, da, da. Well, the way that's asked, it sounds like a judgment on whether, 35% versus 32%, is that good enough, even with the p-values there, by the way. But it's not. It's not a judgment on the magnitude of the effect. It's a judgment about were those good studies, were those adequate studies. And so the FDA puts the substantial evidence language into these questions now, and it confuses the panel. And so here you had the panel chair on this drug that should have just been a slam dunk. He voted against it. And he cited the fact that, he says, the question says, is there substantial evidence of effect and safety here? No, I think there's a preponderance of evidence. And he voted against it. Harvard. He's a smart guy. But he wasn't taught. He wasn't explained the difference between the two things. Funny, 2 people after he voted, another gentleman voted, and he said, I forgot the man's name, say Smith. Well, just no surprise, I was trained by Dr. Smith, and I agree with everything he said. So, you talk about conflicts of interest on the panel. It's all we ever hear about, conflicts, and we have people who don't understand the disease, we have people who don't understand the drug. What about the conflict of having 4? I can't get into it. All right. So these are the kinds of things that happen on the level of when company meets FDA. This level. Up here, policy level, the policies are fantastic. Safety and effectiveness, excellent policy. Orphan drug, beautiful policy. The problems are right here. 180 days, phenomenal. Performance reports, phenomenal. But when we come to where it really meets, that's where we drop it. There's no auditing. Public company auditors, right? Sarbanes, right? You got to audit. There's no auditing of whether the intent of the law and the genomics of the law, right, is really being implemented. And I'm here to tell you it's not. And, I don't believe the FDA, it's broken. I don't believe it needs to be blown up. You need people in there focusing on this stuff. These are the things that all these companies, we have problems. Okay, every day. All right, now, biomarkers. We've all heard of biomarkers. I think the last 2 PDUFA agreements talked about biomarkers. FDA did what they're supposed to do. They wrote some guidance documents, but they've done nothing with biomarkers. Okay. I think biomarkers, of course, should be a base of approval. We have some great biomarkers out there, hemoglobin A1C, glucose, right, cholesterol. We'll get into that in a second. But here's the proof to you that the FDA is afraid of looking at biomarkers, right? Because they say they want validated biomarkers. Okay. I know of no more validated biomarker than LDL cholesterol, okay? I think simvastatin showed if validation means survival, okay? Let's just take that for a minute. I'll run with that. You had simvastatin. You had what's Lipitor? Lipitor is atorvastatin. Then you had, what's Crestor? Datastatin. You know, that one did it, right? And then you had the Repatha and Praluent, right? These drugs are phenomenal. They go before the panel meetings. We're seeing drops in cholesterol, and people maxed out on statins. You're seeing 70% drops. These are amazing. And what label did they give them? They give them labels for the homozygous FH or the heterozygous, the whole bit. There were doctors complaining that were interviewed afterward. Why not also, first of all, they should have just given us blanket for lowering cholesterol. But why not even give us the people who are resistant to statins? No. We need these long-term studies. Again, the most validated biomarker ever, I think. And so Amgen, what do? They go and do a 27,000 patient trial. They had to go do a 27,000 patient trial. Okay? And the other one, I think, is doing a 17,000 patient trial, even though you have these incredible drops in LDL cholesterol. By the way, compliance isn't an issue either. What's the number one problem with drugs? It's compliance. That's the number one problem with drugs. These drugs, once you dose it, you don't have to worry about compliance. So they're great drugs, all right? And what do you think it showed? Lo and behold, it showed that it reduced. Now, I have no problem with the analysts feeling, I wanted to see 30%. I only saw 20-some-odd percent, so I don't think they're going to get the market share. I have no problem with that. That's fine. I have a problem with the basis of approval requiring this kind of stuff. I think it's wrong. Okay. What's this one? Oh, yeah, this is Repatha. These are the claims it got, right? On those 70% reductions of LDL on maximal treatment with statins. And this is the claims they got. They had to go do 27,000 patient trial to get a broader claim. I think that's wrong. Another one I like to talk about is heart failure, Entresto, okay? Why? Why do we have to look at death with heart failure? Why can't we look at ejection fraction? Right? Why can't we look at other surrogates that every cardiologist alive would tell you, yeah, if that patient can now do this on a treadmill, they're going to do better out there. Or they can do this with ejection fraction. Why are we doing this? Just yesterday or the day before, serelaxin failed. You know, I went back to the data. There are hemodynamic effects there. There were effects on dyspnea, but they went and did this huge trial, and it failed. I want that drug approved, and I'll tell you why I want it approved. This is basically the main theme of my talk. It's my last slide, but I'll do it now. Finding single drugs that are having phenomenal impact is getting harder and harder and harder. A couple of recent examples, right? The IL-17 inhibitors, right, in like psoriasis, darn good drugs. Checkpoint inhibitors, darn good drugs. But for the true rare diseases, right, that our hearts bleed and we cry for, and for these chronic diseases that I just talked about, ain't going to be one drug. So what do we want to do? FDA does have a pathway for novel. Not too many people are doing it. They've gotten a little better, I think, but still, it's basically factorial design. You know, you want to show the effect of each drug independently a whole bit. The best way to do combinations is approve these drugs so that they can be used in combination later. That's the best way, as long as they work, right? As long as we can label them for safe use, which is what safety used to mean, and as long as they have some effect. So that drug had some effect, serelaxin, and it's just a beautiful, exquisite new mechanism of action. You're using a protein made by the body during pregnancy that relaxes blood vessels. I really want to see that drug approved. I don't think it's going to happen, all because of the endpoints that FDA tells a company they have to pursue when they're going for these claims, especially the big claims, the chronic disease claims. Yeah, we have a regulation problem. Okay, pure and simple. Is deleting 2 for every new one an answer? Maybe you need deleting 3 for every new one. I'm being funny. I'm being facetious. With all of these regulations, we've seen the hurdle being harder and harder to get through. But I do agree with the president wholeheartedly. I think we can delete a significant number of regulations. Okay, so I wrote this paper called The Proper Role for the FDA in the 21st Century, and I basically made the point that in my career, okay, just in my, whatever, close to 30 years now, I've seen safety go from, can be labeled for safe use, which is what the regulations, what the law says, okay, to this absolute notion of safety. Folks, nothing is safe, okay? No drug is safe. We learn how to safely administer a drug, okay? We dose enough patients in clinical trials to learn that, and we keep learning after they're approved, okay? To now, safety now, basically in over here, not in the law, and if I had someone over there debating me, they'd call me to task, and I wouldn't be able to defend it. It's nowhere in the law, but over here, safety has become benefit risk, okay? And effectiveness used to mean activity, used to mean any sort of activity. Pharmacodynamic activity, positive activity in the disease. And now effectiveness has gone all the way to, no, we want survival. Now with cancer, you can get, well, you know, with pain and things, there's other things. But if it's possible to show, we want to see these long-term studies. And that's not what effectiveness was supposed to be. And in cancer, you can get accelerated approval, but if you don't show the survival benefit, they pull the claim. Look what they did with Avastin in breast cancer. I think it's terrible. All right? So why have we gone from what safety and effectiveness was meant in the law to where we are today? And it's all fear. Okay? I'll be the biggest defender of the folks at the FDA because they're just afraid. And the law was designed so that FDA would enter into the top of this funnel here, safe and effective products. And what would happen, you know, how many drugs are there in the pharmacopoeia? I don't even know. Anybody know? 15,000, 20,000? How many drugs, what number of drugs are used the most? What drugs are used 90% of the time? 200 or 300? Okay? How do you go from 15,000 to 300? Experience, medical marketplace, word of mouth, doc. Okay? So it used to be FDA puts new safe and effective products at the bottom. The medical marketplace decides which are the best to use. And that's what happens. And what I've observed happening over these 15 years is the FDA, out of fear, has moved from being content with being at the top of the funnel, where on approval it wants to be at the bottom of the funnel. And we're done. And so what we have to do, and what I've written a lot about, is getting the FDA back to its proper role, which is safety and effectiveness, and let the other players in the medical marketplace decide which among the safe and effective products really are the most beneficial and most useful. Thank you.